Dani, tu consegue colocar o link lá nos stories? Junto com a programação, se mostrando só a
Aonde?
programação que é lá no Instagram, enquanto a aluna... Ou não, senão eu coloco.
No Instagram eu consigo, no Story.
Pronto.
Só me enviar o link que eu... tem alguém pedindo para participar da chamada.
Pode aceitar.
Pode aceitar?
Pode. Oi, Jailma, bom dia. Vai assistir por aqui hoje, desistir do YouTube?
Oi, Najara, bom dia, tudo bem?
Tudo bom.
Desistiu. No YouTube fica um pouco ruim. Eu disse, não, eu vou ver se eu consigo entrar pelo Hermes mesmo. Aí deu certo agora.
Desculpe. A gente teve probleminhas ontem, mas hoje não teremos mais.
Porque ontem estava tão. Aí eu disse, não, não tenho condições. Aí
Ontem a internet não estava boa,
agora.
mas a gente vai subir os vídeos de ontem.
Ótimo.
Uhum.
Ótimo. Aí quando foi agora, eu disse, eu vou tentar ver por aqui se dá certo. Aí quando eu abri agora, aí deu, ok, aí acessar, né? Aí eu acessei, foi dando certo. Eu digo, então tá dando certo, eu vou seguir por aqui.
Dani, tu avisa ela que alguns alunos estão entrando para assistir aqui.
Professor, some students will also watch your lecture from here, apparently. So we'll be both
that'll be great
on YouTube and here.
okay.
Tu quer... Será que não é saindo e entrando de novo? Desconectando e conectando de novo? Será que não, você não vai ter que desconectar e conectar de novo? Se você fechar tudo e abrir, e reabrir?
Gente, tá transmitindo. Eu tô com o YouTube aberto. Vou tentar, peraí, só um minuto. Eu tô com o YouTube aberto. Tá indo. Vou tentar.
Eu estou conseguindo pelo YouTube. Eu vou sair, gente, vou ficar acompanhando por lá, tá bom?
Tá ótimo. Deu uma travada, Luana. Isso. A tela tá toda preta. Beleza, voltou. Ok. Podemos. Okay, so let's get started. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the first international seminar on environmental studies hosted by the graduate program in engineering and management of natural resource at the Federal University of Campina Grande. My name is Daniela. I'll be your moderator today. And I'd like to thank you all for your presence. And with a special thanks for Professor Dou, who has taken the time to join us and share her research. Just some organizational things. After the lecture, we'll have time for a question and answer session. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the event, and we will pass them on to Professor Dou. If you prefer, you can post it on Portuguese or English, and we translate, no problem. Also, after Professor Dou's talk, the attendance link will be shared in the chat, so watch out for it. So now allow me to introduce Professor Dou. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Health and Environment Science at Xianjiaotong Liverpool University. She holds a PhD in Environment Sciences from Wageningen University. Sorry for my pronunciation on that one. An institution internationally recognized as a world leader in environmental and ecological studies. She will be presenting insights into the roles of landscapes in perceiving physical and mental health services, evidence from China's restoration projects. So without further ado, I'd like to now invite Professor Dou to begin her presentation.
Okay, thanks, Najara. Thanks for the nice introduction and coordination. And good morning and good evening in someone from the Asian time zones. It's my honor to be invited to give a talk, a little bit talk. It won't be very long. And the topic will be about the insights of the roles of landscapes in perceiving physical and mental health services. I will try to use my previous studies, for example, China's restoration project and also habitat conservation projects as some examples for our communication. And firstly, I'd like to introduce a little bit about ecological restorations. I guess most of the audience, also the organizing team, will hear these words quite frequently, especially in the recent decades, since we are facing a severely changing program regarding the climate change and economic development, urbanization, also the inequality among wealth conditions and other population pressures. So our environment, unfortunately, has been damaged to different levels. So the global community tend to use ecological restorations to recover back, to make the ecosystems more like they once were. But the following question is that, why? Why would like to do that? What will ecosystem benefit us if we want to keep it healthy or stable or just like what they once were? And before we dig into my own research, I'd like to share you a small video from United Nations Environmental Program. One of my favorite videos to introduce you what is ecosystem restoration, or we can also call it ecological restoration, environmental restoration, not much difference, but get a general idea about the restoration thing. Let me try to change the screen to the video. Leave me a moment. Guess this one. Can you guys hear, watch the video?
Yes, you can.
Okay. No more.
Today, we are using 1.6 Earths to give us what we need to live, eat, and grow our economies. We are plundering and polluting nature's resources, treating it as a dumping ground for plastic and waste. If we don't act now, we could lose 1 million species in the next few decades. Like we would lose our coral reefs, which will impact fish first, then fishers, then entire economies. But it doesn't have to be this way. What if I told you there's a solution? It's called ecosystem restoration. Healthy ecosystems regulate our drinking water and carbon, which are the backbone of life on Earth. All living things need carbon. Trees store carbon, so does soil, and seagrass in the ocean. Even the human body is 18% carbon. But as ecosystems become weak, they release carbon instead of storing it. Look at the soil below your feet. Healthy soil grows 95% of our food. But pollution, climate change, and pesticides are making soil less productive. And when yields go down, instead of restoring, we expand. Till more land, turning wild places into farmland, and pollute healthy soil. When we lose forests, wildlife is forced to come closer to humans, bringing what's called zoonotic disease, a virus that is passed between animals and humans, like bird flu, Ebola, and COVID-19. But there are some actions we can take today. Growing trees in cities would help to cut pollution dramatically. They would filter and cool the air, improving our health and reducing global warming. But trees can do more. Look at mangroves, for example. For each dollar we spend on restoring mangroves, we would earn $4 as they protect our coastlines from storms and floods. Building economies around nature will create jobs for the future, jobs that you could have. Restoring ecosystems will not be simple, and it will not be easy. But together, we can do it. We are calling entrepreneurs, thinkers, leaders in your family, school, and workplace to get involved. Can you do your part too? Reimagine how and what you consume.
Okay, I guess we can stop here. We got enough information. And let's go back to our screen PowerPoint. There we go. Are we back, right? So we already, from the video, like they showed us a little bit information about what nature could contribute to us and what we can do for the nature. And things changed because in the very past years, like people have a feeling of like a so-called traditional human-centered theory, like people feel like we are the owner of the planet, so we can manage and use every resources freely. But then, of course, unfortunately, the nature give us lessons, and we know that we cannot do this. It's not very good for us too. And we have to care about the nature-human balance. We have to do the environmental remediation, ecological restoration things. And then there are more and more motivations for us to restore the ecosystem, to make them healthy and stable. For example, like what the video has introduced, the healthy environment could mitigate the impacts to the ecosystem elsewhere, and also provide habitats for the threatened or endangered species. Like biodiversity loss is one of the biggest challenge in this century. And also for some aesthetic concerns and moral reasons, we also, most of the culture who have a long history and are still existing, they have the philosophy of keep harmony with nature. And also, there are legal requirements. There are international governance about how we can manage the shared public resource, which is the planet, well and equally, and improving the human livelihoods and empowering local people and improving the ecosystem productivity. So there are several senses, like why we need to care and why we need to restore the ecosystem. From the climate sense, which is one of the most hottest topic globally. If nature were protected and restored at a scale, it could provide more than 1/3 of the annual emissions reductions the world needs by 2030 to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. For example, there are green carbon storage from the forests, from the plants, mainly the forest, and there are also blue carbon storage from the mangrove, from the coastal ecosystems, also from the mudfloods. And from the more practical perspective, like for economic sense, like healthy ecosystems and landscapes support industries like farming, fishing, forestry, and tourism, which will employ 1.2 billion people. And the records is from 5 years ago. And globally, each $1 invested in restoring degraded landscapes can bring $7 to $30 in economic returns in a lot of ways. And also, the biggest importance, the cultural sense, like restoring ecosystems can also directly serve the world's indigenous people and communities, many of them who rely on the natural resources for their livelihoods and cultural practice. So by far, we already have the sense like, okay, ecosystem, or we call it a healthy environment or healthy ecosystem, is very important for us, and we could do something to it. But how ecological restoration directly related to human development and sustainable development is one of the key strategies like globally agreed on our future development. So we need to think more about ecological restoration in a complex social ecological systems. We're not just plant trees. We have to make the behavior more sustainable. And we have to keep harmony between humankind and nature. And then we can try to understand the human ecosystem interactions under this large global ecological restoration trend. And how we study the human ecosystem interactions, which is very big, very broad, and somehow weak. So how can we understand which point we are standing at in this large interactions? A recent research clearly identified, like at different levels, people intervent in the environment, and they will lead to different consequences. And on the other way around, if we see the upper part of this figure, like if we intervene more, we will, well, if we do it in a bad way, we will make the healthy ecosystem, healthy native ecosystem to degraded or highly degraded or completely modified or degraded ecosystem. That means large biodiversity loss, all polluted nature resources, which means very little to our human benefits. But if we do it in another round, if we try to do environmental remediation, which means remove the pollutants from the physical environment, and then try to apply ecological rehabilitation, which means we recreate the habitats for native species, no matter plants or mammals or other kind of animals. And then one at this stage, in between of this stage and next one, the ecosystem and the nature itself, it has resilience. It could try to recover itself if we leave enough space and time for it. So after that, we try to apply ecological restoration, which is the slightest action we want to apply to the physical environment. And after that, when we have somehow resilient native ecosystem, we just keep it aside. People step away, and nature could recovering itself for native ecosystems. It's called the ideal situation that we make the ecosystem just like what they were. But the system itself is complex, and the way human will intervene could influence a lot. Like we have a lot of choices, we have a lot of different timings to do, and we have a lot of actions we could do. And before we can really do some implementations of our theory or our strategy or policy, we have to know that how ecosystem itself is linked to the human system. So ecosystem including biodiversity in most of the cascade models. Firstly, it provides a foundation for biophysical structure of our processes. And then it provides ecological functions, which means that biomass and water recycling. And then in this part, when humans start to benefit from those ecological functions, we call it ecosystem services. This cascade model is widely recognized globally and first created from TEB system, and I think it's quite straightforward to express our next key concept, which is ecosystem services. Ecosystem itself and human system, they are separate, and somehow they have beneficiary conflicts. If humans take too much from ecosystem, it won't work well. But if human could not take enough from the ecosystem, the other societies, the human system could not function very well too. Then keep the balance is very important. And at this stage, we need a framework that could help us measure in a relatively quantitative way to assess how nature could contribute to human system. Then where ecosystem service, this concept grows. The definition of ecosystem services is as simple as possible, which is the benefits that people gained from nature. It can be categorized in 4 large categories. The first one is provisioning, second one is regulating, and third one is supporting, and last one is cultural ecosystem services. And the ecosystem services provided by natural environment are estimated as $125 trillion, around 7 times of China's GDP every year to global economy. I guess we all agree that China has a big GDP, but the nature itself could work much better than China's GDP every year. And let's go through different type of ecosystem services. The first one is provisioning services, which means the tangible products or resources that human could obtain directly from nature, such as food, water, timber fiber, and medical products. In other words, the raw materials we use directly from the nature could be categorized into the provisioning ecosystem services. For example, the wood, fish, and clean water, and other kind of medicine or plants, herbs, all belongs to the provisioning services that nature provided to us. And the second and very important one is the regulating ecosystem services, which are the benefits obtained from the process that regulate ecosystems, such as climate and flood regulation, pollination, and water purification. For the small circle in the middle, you can identify that it means carbon storage, which is very important for us and attract a lot of attentions recently because the carbon trade thing. And ecosystem is a natural carbon stock. In addition to forest, coastal ecosystem also provide a lot of capacity of stock carbon from the air. And also pollinators, the pollination service. I think most of the environmental students heard of the famous book like Silent Spring. The birds was killed by pesticide in last century. The same with those pollinators, these bees, butterflies, other small insects, which really play a very important role in the whole healthy ecosystem. And also the most visible regulation services is the flood mitigation. The video from UNEP also introduced this a little bit. I think these services attract a lot of attention after 2008. It was a very large tsunami in the Northeast Asia. And people don't know that before this large disaster, that the mangroves along the coast could mitigate a lot of floods during those large disasters. And for some fishery community, they naturally surrounded by a lot of mangroves, a small part of or with less fragmented mangrove forests. They don't know why, but they feel being protected. And now a lot of fishery communities are the primary initiator of mangrove protection or mangrove planting along the Northeast Asia. That means that humans learned ecosystem services from what they experienced, and they recognize the benefits that they can obtain from those regulating services. And in a way, return, they like to protect, to maintain, to sustain the services that could benefit. And the next step, as supporting services, we can call it as the fundamental processes that enable all other services, but not yield directly benefits to humans. For example, soil formation. We have to use this service, for example, the soil formation, to create soil, but we don't directly benefit from it. We benefit from food, which relies on soil. Similar, like water cycling, habitat prevention, etc. Also, genetic resources pool. There are a lot of small species that we don't know how it will help our society. But the gene kept in those small species might be very helpful and influential in the medicine or drug fields when we have new diseases, or if we want to come over some new challenges in human health. That is very important too. We have to keep it before we want to know it. No, we want to really use the function or know the real function of it. And the next step, the last step, is what we want to focus on today. It's a cultural ecosystem services, which are the non-material, non-economic benefits that people get from nature, such as spiritual enrichment, recreation, aesthetics experiences, and what our topic will focus on, the physical and mental health. Nature has been proved by environmental psychology fields, and a lot of environmental psychologists, they published large papers and did a very large number of research to prove that green, especially natural green, is very good for humans' mental health, for stress relief, etc. And in the framework of cultural ecosystem services, we want to further identify those non-material benefits that people could obtain from nature for most cases, because for cultural services, we are using nature without damaging it, without removing it. We just watch or experience, we just stay there. We don't use up any resources. So it's relatively kind of public and a limited resource if we keep the ecosystem well, and we can use these services on and on. And one restoration play a role in the whole complex social ecological system. We want, from the human's perspective, we want to care about the social cultural well-beings. Ecological restoration itself is quite straightforward, right? If we just understand from the superficial layer, it means make water blue, make land green. But that's all ecological benefits. Is that enough for us? Is that enough for our society? The answer is unfortunately no. We have to care about the people's position here. And in the cultural ecosystem service framework, we means that there are a lot of types, but generally it's kind of commonly used framework. Like we have recreational services, which means people will have opportunity to play, walk dogs, play with family, with kids in the natural environment. And also nature education and naturalists, like wildlife sightseeing, is more and more popular, especially when a society have a certain good economic condition. People somehow have a trend to enjoy the wildlife sightseeing. They want more biodiversity and also a sense of place. People have attachment with a place that they grow up or they stay for a very long time. They have their special linkage with the environment there. And this can't be restored. They can restore trees, they can restore wetlands, but they cannot restore your memory, or they can't restore the whole atmosphere that you grow up. So why cultural ecosystem service needs attention? Because we may lose it without knowing it. And same as inspirations. A lot of handcraft get inspirations from nature, from the local culture, or from the traditional way of people interact with nature. This is a very important and beneficial sources for a lot of indigenous people or local communities, that they're where their traditional special culture rooted. And next one is cultural heritage. This is irreplaceable. This cannot be restored to. And aesthetic services. I think that's the basic right of every human being to enjoy beautiful things in our daily life. And the last one is physical and mental health, our key concept today. So people do benefit from from environment in their physical and mental perspective. But do people know that? Do they perceive this physical and mental health service from the environment? Do they know that they benefit from nature? That's a very large question to answer. So again, before we go to the detailed specific case studies, let's try to go through again why cultural ecosystem service is important in ecological restoration. First one is that because the United Nations has named the decades from 2021 to 2030 as a decade of ecosystem restoration. It promotes large-scale restoration to address climate crisis, safeguard biodiversity, and improve human well-being. Human well-being is very important, and human well-being has been largely overlooked in this large ecological restoration phase. And nature conservation and ecological restoration integrate social ecological systems with goals expanding from ecosystem optimization to enhancing human well-being. We already know that another way, let's call it another way of human-centered era. From the traditional human could rule everything to human need to be cared in the process that people try to protect nature. And existing studies primarily focusing on the ecosystem functions, which I just said that the ecological benefits, because it's easy to measure and it's easy to evaluate as the outcome of a restoration project. But with limited attention to ecological restoration, social and cultural impacts. Well, technically, because it's hard to measure, a lot of research or evaluation projects have to based on the qualitative perspective or qualitative indicators, which is kind of subjective and localized. And another way is that measure ecological indicators is much faster and could be generalized to a large scale. So all those practical and the social limitations make the social and cultural impacts led by ecological restoration is overlooked. And overestimating the social cultural impacts limits restoration effectiveness and long-term sustainable development. Why? Because even from the governance perspective, each country protect its own environment. But for what? People have to live in this environment. If we don't really care about the social and cultural impacts, the restoration will be endless. People will use their environment in the traditional way, which led to the degradation. So make people get involved, engaged, agreed about the whole thing, about the whole theory, and make people have the awareness of their own way of protect the environment or keep harmony with the environment is very important for restoration's effectiveness and sustainable development. And then I'll give you some examples that what we observed from China's restoration and conservation projects. Firstly, I will go through 5 key examples, like my favorite case studies in different ecosystems in China. And probably you already know that China have a large national boundary and it has very diverse ecosystems. And the restoration face different challenges, and the consequences are different too. And local people varies from their cultural and other ethnic backgrounds, and they will react different to the. They will react differently to ecological restorations in different ecosystems. So in this process, in this let's say last 10 years, we generally use mixed approach methods to investigate local perception and human intervention. In other words, like we use quantitative data and qualitative data together to detect how local people perceive the changes caused by the ecological restoration. Also, we try to involve spatial analysis and some socioeconomic factors, really related to the local livelihoods, which will also influenced a lot by the ecological restoration programs. Let's go into the first ecosystem. It's a dryland agricultural ecosystem. I guess some of you may already heard about the Grant for Green program in China. It's one of the largest, or we can call it most famous ecological restoration projects in China. Under the large project, the government, I think, imply many stakeholders to to be involved in this whole restoration program to encourage local farmers abandon their agricultural land with a slope larger than 15 degrees. And most of these restoration sites are located in the Losses Plateau, which is a traditional dry land and relatively less productive area. So under this program, we take 2 case studies. One is Yan'an in Shanxi province. Yan'an is culturally important for Chinese people because it's like the castle of new foundation, the foundation of new China in last century. And another one is Dou Yuehan in Ningxia, also in the Losses Plateau, but this one used to be famous for its poverty. So one of the poorest county in China. And another social factor of this Grant for Green program is that I think we did it very successfully to also achieve poverty alleviation along the ecological restoration. So one, we try to convince people to stop the traditional way of farming to sustain ecosystem or to restore the forest or the grassland there. We also try to find them new alternative livelihoods without destroying their traditional way, without destroying their income paths. And in the case studies, we use typical social data collection methods, like we talk with the old people in those towns, talk with the local governors, and talk with the residents living in that area. And from the case studies, we can conclude that those are typical drylands. And it was a short way on the ancient Silk Road. You know that China is implementing the new One Belt, One Road strategy to try to collaborate with other countries globally. And these areas was located on the Asian Silk Road. So it was economic property. But in recent years, due to the environmental degradation, it's Losses Plateau. From the name, you see that there are a lot of land erosion. And they have been farming for generations. And those 2 cases were influenced very big by the Grant for Green restoration project. By trying to summarize the interaction between people and drylands, we synthesize this framework. like people perceive cultural ecosystem services from very different ways, right? And then the perception, on the one hand, will drive their local engagement or cooperation with those projects, and also will incorporate cultural values in landscape planning or management. When they have a good perception of the cultural values from their land, they can use this knowledge to get landscape planning and management after the restoration. In this way, it will inform the large restoration projects, and their local engagement will also motivate ecological restoration projects. And after the ecological restoration, like people, the restorers, together with the local community, they shape the drylands, right? They try to improve the health condition or the quality of drylands, and then dryland pay back by providing multiple ecosystem services and ecological functions back to people. So this general conceptual framework could describe the interactions between people and dryland agricultural ecosystems in China's restoration project. But what about people's perception? We know that people perceive cultural ecosystem services, but why they perceive different ecosystem service differently, and what will change their perception? From the previous study, we've intensified the restoration project influence people's perception from 3 ways. Firstly, is the land use changes. It's the most straightforward influence restoration project has on the land it will restore. When land use changed, people have to change their livelihoods. People have to change from farming to some other way of living. And this process will change people's idea, will change people's perception of land. And also, it will change economic situation. As I mentioned, along this project, poverty alleviation is a very prioritized goal of the restoration project. Also, it's a long-term and large-scale project. In the project process, for example, after 10 or 20 years, generation changes and the locals' ideology also change. So there are several complex social factors that will shape people's perception on the lands and the restoration projects. And we try to conclude the social dynamics, like what the figure on the left described, and try to categorize again within the intangible cultural ecosystem services. For example, there are automatic response services, like aesthetic services or physical and mental health. It's not subjective, although it have a nature of subjectiveness, but general human or a certain group of human will have a similar feeling of this kind of services. And in the latent group analysis, like this kind of services, for example, what we focus on is the physical and mental health services, is high perceived among this process. And we can see from the levels of changes of cultural services after the restoration project as perceived by the local interviewees. The first one is physical and mental health. Some of them feel, and a certain amount of them feel, that physical and mental health perception has been significantly decreased. We have a previous result that we just mentioned that, right? The physical and the mental health services, it has a perceived, but the perception is that the service is decreased. Why? We want to know the reason. From the restoration projects, it was a ecologically successful one. People have successfully transferred the used drylands to forest and to something else to make it greener. But the cultural services, the cultural ecosystem service, especially the physical and mental health, did not improve as much as we expected. And when we try to build correlations between the cultural services, perception, and landscape features and social engagements, For the physical and mental health, we can see that most landscapes have notable impacts on the physical and mental health. And physical and mental health also strongly affected by employment opportunities and family interactions. And when we go even more details to the dependency of physical and mental health on those local landscape features, we'll find that forests, which is the newcomer of this restoration project, they influence, but not much. But people do love agricultural land in the physical and mental health service perception. I think that could explain a little bit why the perception has been significantly changed and was considered as decreased. Although physically or biologically, greener environment benefit mental and physical health better. But in the short term, for the local people, their perception still largely attached to the agricultural land, which they used to have a lot, or they used to use to support their family. So people's ideology can be changed, but needs time. And then we go to another restoration project, which also a little bit similar to the dryland ecosystem. It's another famous restoration project in China. We call it comprehensive grassland restoration. We have a case study there in Xilin Guole in Inner Mongolia. So the case area, they have 3 different regions: typical grassland pastoral, and Hansenshik sandy pastoral, and agro-pastoral transitional zones. So in this area, people's traditional livelihood is pastoral herding, but also farming. To feed different micro ecosystem here and have different ecological restoration strategies. For example, they have dominated by control of livestock rearing, mainly applied in the typical grassland pastoral zone. They want to keep grassland by reduce or control the grazing activities. And also, another type of control is about the purely prohibition of intensive grazing, mainly in the Hansendig sandy pastoral zone. We can see why, because it's already kind of sandy pastoral zone. If we keep grazing even slightly there, the ecosystem will be further damaged. And then for those agro-pastoral transitional zone, was dominant by the strategy of seasonal grazing, by grazing also supplemented by grazing prohibition. So people could rotational graze there in a rotational way. And interesting result about this is that under different ecological restoration strategy, physical and mental health was fully influenced. Of course, by different strategy, but fully influenced by 2 other social factors. The first one is occupation, and the second one is ethnicity. The case area is located in, let's say, ethnic minority dominant province in Mongolia. The majority there was Mongolian people, and we also have Han people and Hui people, so different ethnic groups. And the ethnicity played a very important role in the way people perceive the physical and mental health service. In this way, we can conclude that the cultural backgrounds of people represented by the ethnicity in this case study played a very important role in the physical and mental health service perception. And another one is occupation. We're not surprised because the different restoration strategy influence people's livelihoods in different way. So if people really rely on the husbandry, rely on grazing, so they will be fully influenced by those grazing forbidden strategy. But if people rely on farming and other activities, the influence will be less. And then the interesting part of this case study is that from the large restoration projects influence on physical and mental health perception, we identify, in addition to the physical natural environment, some social factors play very important role because it will change people's understanding of the same thing, even in the same community. So ethnicity is something we want to further test. And then we do another research in another kind of restoration and conservation project. We call it transformation of forest utilization. It's in a forest ecosystem. It's not the traditional way of restoration to reforest the forest or to plant trees in the forest. It's more like they used to use the trees here. It's in the northeast part of China, also located in Inner Mongolia, but it's a mountain area. So in the past years, they used the forest as its provisioning services. They provide wood directly. They harvest wood directly every year. But under the restoration or transformation of forest utilization project, they try to make those utilized forest as a national wetland forest park now. So they switched the whole community livelihood from harvesting woods to ecotourism. And the figure on the right part of the screen shows a very interesting result because we try to build a cultural service hotspot map together with local communities by the way of participatory mapping. And based on those mapping, they design the facilities in the forest park. The results are quite similar. The way, when they want to provide some tourist attractive points, they have to give it some meaning. And we found those meanings are just rely on their understanding, their perception of the ecosystem services provided by those forests and wetlands. And in this case, we want to test, in addition to the landscapes, in addition to the natural physical features, we want to test the social factors influence in people's perception of physical and mental health. Again, we did a structural equation modeling by the samples we collected there. We found ethnicity again played a very important role, significant role in people's perception of physical and mental health. In addition to that, education also played a very important role here. And because this place is also a cross-cultural region, so it have even more ethnicities in the small community, like Evenki, Orkin, Dao, Han, and also Mongolian people. We can see that when they perceive physical and mental health, Mongolian people have a quite different perspective than the other four. Also, because can be explained by the Mongolian people have their own culture, but they are the dominant group there. And for the other three, we can see that Han people is a majority in the whole China. But for those other three ethnic minorities, their culture are similar, but they have really small group. So the difference among those cultures with Han people did not show very well. Okay, from this case study and together with previous ones, we have seen that we can conclude that ethnicity as a cultural background play a very important role in the same landscape and the similar restoration projects about similar dominant landscapes. And then we have a totally different landscape example, which is coastal ecosystem along the southern China, on the Hainan Island. It's the case area is located in Wenchang. We call it Huiwen wetland. It's like a very classical textbook tropical coastal wetland. It has every ecosystem that a tropical coastal wetland should have: seagrass, mangrove, mudfloods, and open seawater. And it's very important and can't be replaced by any other species in the migratory birds flyway, and have a very high biodiversity regarding both birds, mammals, insects, and also plants, but was severely impacted by aquaculture and development and overuse. The island, the Hainan Island in China, is a very famous tourist direction. So a lot of real estate development is here, not surprising. And this very important biodiversity hotspot and very important coastal wetlands. It's just located there for years under no protection. And we did on-site survey there, and we also surveyed the plants and birds there, and also do some interviews with the local people. We identified that they are, again, like other ecological restoration projects, it's never ecological itself. It always compiled with some social factors. For example, a lot of people went out to have a higher paid job. So there are some left behind children and elders still living in the small community in the countryside, in the villages. And there are several abandoned houses. So nobody was living there anymore. But still, the area is largely influenced by the aquaculture of some companies. For example, the discharge of those fish ponds or shrimp ponds, they destroy the coral reefs and polluted seagrass because it's introduced too many nutrients in the seawater. And fish ponds somehow was transferred from the traditional mangrove forests, and coral are dead. And there are wastes along the coast, domestic waste and other waste. And also, mudfloods were destroyed by the aquacultures and also real estate, like the establishment of new hotels and buildings. And how people's feeling about this change? How about people's perception of the services they could benefit from nature was influenced by this kind of change? Based on the previous conceptual framework, we did another structural equation modeling with key factors there. We can find that for the physical and mental health, from the social factors, we first look at the social factors. For physical and mental health, gender played a very important role. Living length means how long people have been lived there, and income, like the previously economic conditions, again proves that some social factors, when we have a small community and very kind of isolated from the modern society, they are living in a countryside area, the social factors play more important roles. And then let's go back to our landscapes. From the figure on the left, we can see that physical and mental health are influenced by a lot of landscapes there. For, like the villages, mudflood water birds, and cultivated lands. They have cultivated lands along their house, and temples, mangrove forests, beach and coral reefs, and open sea. But clearly, physical and mental health are more attached to the beach, open sea, and mudflood water birds. So in this case, natural, let's say relatively more natural landscape play more important role than those meaning attached places like temples and villages. And then we want to see, because it's a coastal area, so it's more linear. It's like a linear boundary. So it's not very centered by a large community, but people live along the coast. And then how the different character of those landscapes influence, like the distance to the place, to the landscape, or the overall area of those places. And we did another analysis. We used random forest to detect the importance of those variables. And we can see for physical and mental health, In general, the distance to the disturbance or to the landscapes play a more important role than the area of those things. That's interesting too. Like it means that accessibility is very important for people who want to perceive or who want to use the natural environment as physical and mental health service. And then we adopt the theoretical background back to the urban environment. Because in China, urban restoration is also a very typical classic restoration types. We'll use Shenzhen as an example. Shenzhen is a famous, highly developed and economic proper city next to Hong Kong. So it's located in Guangdong province, which means the economic development in the past years was rapid and pollution was a lot too. Back to 10 years ago, let's say 15 years ago, to be transparent, the ecosystem of this our study area is a river basin. So the ecosystem was largely destroyed. The water was almost black and smells. The public health was concerned by the residents who live along the river, and there are a lot of biodiversity loss. Guangdong province is rich in biodiversity, but this area, because of degradation and the bad environment, once a long time ago, they hardly see any birds or migratory, especially migratory water birds. But after the restoration project, we can see that the water has been purified and more wetland has been created. So it's a typical case of successful large-scale ecological restoration projects in China, especially in the urban ecosystems. And then we want to emphasize that why the urban ecosystem is special. Because it impacts a large number of people directly compared with those coastal wetlands. These are small villages, small communities, right? And those small villages or small ethnic minority groups, there may be somehow subjective, only could represent their own. But in the urban ecosystem, any restoration projects impacts a large number of people, especially for these largely populated urban areas. And China's key strategy of eco-civilization emphasizes the harmony between humans and nature. Especially vital in urban contexts, we cannot only protect the environment in those very natural environments, right? We have to care the environment in our surrounding if we really care about human well-being. And overlooking social and cultural considerations will risk the sustainability of urban wetland management. And also, urban residents have elevated expectations for quality of life. Intervening restoration with so-called social and cultural demands. A very easy example is the price of house in urban areas. Those houses surrounded by mangroves or surrounded by forests or centered in urban parks are much higher, are much more expensive for those just buildings with no natural environment, right? So we aim to use these urban case studies to investigate urban river restoration social and cultural impacts from the local community, or we call it from the urban residents' perspective, and destructure the influence of different restoration actions by adapting a theory. But theory is just a restoration theory. And then let's first clarify that similar to other ecosystems, the urban restoration influence three main types of landscapes, like the river and bank, and wetlands and water bodies, and urban green spaces. That's what ecological restoration could do in an ecological way, right? And then we adapt the stepwise ecological restoration theory to this place. Like at different stages, when people try to restore the environment, people apply different actions. For example, when the environment was pretty bad, very bad. The water was black and everything was every animal was disappeared. In that stage, we have to apply environmental remediation, means remove those pollutants directly from the ecosystem to make the ecosystem could take a breath. And then in the second phase is ecological rehabilitation, to introduce new water, clean water, eco water to the environment, to the wetlands, and create some wetland parks. Meanwhile, to deal with the pollutants, because the pollutants could be kept in those wetlands, and the water will be purified by the wetlands by providing the regulating ecosystem services, water purification. And then in the current stages, those wetlands and small water parks has been created, and the ecosystem is somehow looks nicer than before. And then we leave it to the large phase, like to make the urban environment recover by itself. So in the whole phases, there are different actions taken by the restoration projects. People will be influenced differently in different stage. And one way surveyed the people who are living along the river basin, like the river was a restored object. So one way you try to ask them to identify which are most important for their life. Not surprisingly, for almost 45% people identify urban green spaces as most important. If they have to lose something, the urban green spaces will be the last thing they want to lose. And then the wetlands and water bodies. And the least one is river and banks, which is kind of surprising because it's a river basin. We used to believe, we have the assumption that river is very important for those people. But no, they still prefer the greenness place as the most important thing. And also a similar survey was conducted about the perception of different ecosystem service, cultural ecosystem services. Again, for the physical and mental health perception, urban green spaces play the biggest role, following by the wetland and water bodies, and least influenced by the river and banks. But keep this in mind, now we will go to another interesting result. We try to make different composition of those landscapes will be influenced by the restoration, ecological restoration, and to see that if a different composition could play a different role and which is the best compensation for those different service perception. We can see that for ideal situation that area have very good wetlands, water bodies, meanwhile have river and banks and urban green spaces have everything healthy and beautiful, will of course provide most ecosystem service regardless of which type. But for the physical and mental health, from our survey, the environment have a composition of green spaces and river and banks, it is enough. When we add like wetlands and water bodies, the proportion did not increase at all. So it means that when the environment have urban green spaces and river and banks, it already meet the maximum of the requirements of perceiving physical and mental health. But let's go back that we can see that people perceive wetland and water bodies as a second important factor when they perceive physical and mental health services. And then why? Why in the real scenario that they don't care about wetlands and water bodies anymore, unless they have green spaces and river banks will be enough. Then we did another analysis to see what influenced physical and mental health much. Among all those areas, all the factors, activity, like how people engage with those environments, play a especially important role, especially in the perception of physical and mental health. Never showed in other cases, which means in urban areas, people may use the environment more than other areas in a non-material way. Like in the other cases, people to different levels, they always use ecosystem as producer, they harvest from it, or their livelihood will rely on that. But in the urban area, it's a totally different context. So we assume that people may care more about accessibility to those different environment rather than just seeing it. Then we did another special characters analysis. And if we see the physical and mental health service here and here in different figures, we can find that our assumption is correct. So the distance to different landscapes influence very much. For example, the distance to wetland and water bodies influence physical and mental health a lot. And meanwhile, the areas of wetlands and water play a negative role in their perception. But on the other hand, the area of bank areas like river and banks play an even more negative role in the perception. And the distance of bank play a similar negative role. So this means that indicating the respondents perceive greater healthy benefits when wetlands and water bodies are closer. And strongly negatively associated with those area of river and banks, likely due to safety concerns. People have a feeling that if there are larger river and bank areas, it means unsafe, which is quite understandable because people want to use easy, safe, pleasant water places like wetlands. But for the real river, because of the depth, because of the slope, because of other things, also because of their bad memory of those pollutants, they may want to keep distance to the river and banks. And then we destructure every ecological restoration actions and to test it for different ecosystem services perception. And for the physical and mental health part, we can see that the yellow means not very significant, and the upper arrow means increase, and if the arrow went down, it means decrease. And for the physical and mental health, well, most of them did not really didn't change a lot. But in the second stage, like when we have removed the pollutant, the ecosystem has been restored in a certain area to a certain level. When we make one green spaces to more green spaces, means we increase the green spaces, but in small areas, in scattered way. It significantly improves the physical and mental health service perception. But when we make the river and banks, when we make the area of river and banks larger, it's significantly negatively related to the physical and mental health services, as well as others too. And then if we create more wetlands and water bodies, it will have negative impacts on other services like aesthetic values or something else, or sense of place. But obviously, it contributes to a lot of the enhancement of perception of physical and mental health. And from the all types of ecosystem services, physical and mental health shows very different and unique trends in people's perception. That's why we want to keep it as a key concept of this talk when we want to when I want to discuss with you about the ecological restoration's influence. So as a short summary of the experiences we have, like from dryland to coastal wetlands, at least 7% of the local communities and urban residents perceived physical and mental health as a cultural benefit from nature, with no hesitance. And ethnicity influenced physical and mental health perception and values in all study areas, exhibiting ethnic variability. It means that when an area have more than one ethnicities, the ethnicity played a role in their different perception of physical and mental health. And dominant landscape features are perceived as more important by local communities. And the landscape composition provide higher physical and mental health than single landscape. So it's important for those restoration approach to increase the complex landscape, to increase the complexity of landscape, to maintain people's physical and mental health perception. Not a special or rare feathers of the landscape responsible for physical and mental health provision, but the common and widespread ones, like the green spaces in every ecosystem. And also, the appreciation appeared to closely link to the intensity of interaction. It means the engagement, public engagement, and accessibility to those landscapes are more important than those special and rare landscape features. Based on those summaries and those data and case studies, there are two main conclusions that we want to draw and want to discuss with the peers. Like, we believe that ecological restoration and conservation projects influence physical and mental health service perception by influencing the opportunities for local people to engage with their landscapes, as well as potentially influencing the demographic characteristics of local communities. And also considering physical and mental health, local community, and the way they interact with different landscape phases in ecological conservation and restoration could help to improve the conservation effectiveness and pioneer the new co-management arrangements. In words, people played a central role. What they believe will influence what they do, and how they engage will influence how success will the restoration projects will. And that's all from me today. And thank you very much for attending and listening. And you can see my contact information. Well, very happy to receive any comments and collaborations. If you also interested in this similar topics, please contact and we can try to see if we have some opportunities for further collaboration. And that's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm ready for it.
Thank you so much, Professor. Oh, what a great presentation.
Thank you.
We have some comments and a question. I will read it for you now.
Oh, thank you.
Nicholas asked if he thanks for this very interesting overview of ES in landscapes. What are the biggest learning experience you have observed in your study, your students, while in the field with them? What difference in ES value do they notice?
But pardon, something missing in the question. Sorry, I think it's a network problem.
No problem. What are the biggest learning experiences you have observed in your students while in the field with them? What differences in ES value do they notice?
If I understand correctly, this question is about like how the students learning in those ES valuation framework. Well, I can see a clear and I could say that promising trends is that back to the years when I was a student who studied ES valuation, people still care very much about monetary valuation. They want to use numbers to support governance, to support political negotiation. But recently, since we have more and more focus on the human well-being, we care more about the people's feeling in those kind of things. More social perspective has been involved in the process. So now, if we assess any large-scale ecosystem service valuation, we'll see that social factors are the cherry on the cake. So without social factors, like little projects could be approved to to do real practical actions. So I think this is a promising trend, and people, students, especially young students, like undergraduate students, when they started to learn, they noticed the human well-being concept at the very beginning. So I don't think it will lead to a wrong direction, like we destroy and then we restore. They carry it from the very beginning, so I think it will be better and better.
Great. Amanda also sent a comment and another comment and a question.
Yes.
I think you can see it on the chat.
From the chat, okay.
Okay. But
That's...
I will also read it so everyone that it's on YouTube can listen to it. So she said, Dear Dr. Dou, the framework you presented about restoration and mental health in drylands is truly inspiring and highly relevant. It brings a fresh and much needed perspective that is rarely discussed in studies on nature conservation strategies. I especially appreciate the inclusion of empirical cases, which make the discussion more grounded and meaningful for understanding real-world dynamics. She said that it seems that the problems are always the same around the world.
But thanks for the next words.
Yeah, and then she said that when I studied ecology abroad in Europe, researchers often built two global scenarios about the collapse of natural resource, one using data from China and another using estimated data for China because they said that Chinese data were not reliable. I would like to hear your thoughts on this perception and how you see data transparency and reliability involving in China today. I also found the framework you presented about restoration and mental health in drylands very relevant and rarely discussed in studies on nature conservation strategies. Considering that China has also been expanding its development model based on resource exploitation, such as mining and large-scale monoculture, how is China seeking to reconcile resource exploitation and ecosystem conservation in a global context? When I study ecology, I think it's double. Yeah, it's that.
It's the same contents, right? Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. I would say that's a very good question, especially when talking about the data transparency. It's not the first time I hear this kind of question, not only in the case of China, but also in other regions. Since I also studied in Europe for a long time, and we face this kind of challenges all the time. I think it's a common issue in the scientific world, especially because most of our outcomes should have to rely on data. And I was lucky because I collect data by myself. But for a lot of other peers and researchers, they have to rely on like even large data sets, which have to be collected by others. Otherwise, the research won't work due to time and labor limitations, right? But in a way that I think globally, I think somehow dominant by those top lead journals, they are requiring every authors to provide transparent data, and every staff they modify the data if they want to get the word published and heard by the other peers. So I think if we come to use reliable resources, it will be fine. I also hear a lot of other researchers, like people now has used like a crowded source methods, like to collect data from Twitter, from social media, or from private sectors. That's fine, but that will even more challenging because we have to standardize the data based on our own understanding and also depend on the trust you can put into the data. But for my cases, it won't be a problem. And I never see a problem in this kind of social data collection because the data has a subjective nature. if we don't trust it, but it also depends on the skills that the surveyor use. The surveyor has how experienced you are. People could easily lie to you, but if you ask weak questions, you can't, blame the respondents to give you weak answers. So I think the core of this whole data transparency thing is that how's academic unit, how's academic community, we have to face it together. And we have to care about our own integrity, then we can contribute to others' integrity. And on the other hand, for especially my expertise in the social, using social methods to collect data, like first you have to choose the right respondents, and then you have to really care about the research design, because people are people. When you ask, people answer. Anyway, you will have some data, but the quality depends on your research design. And for the second part of the question, like China, the ecosystem restoration in a global context, I don't think I'll try to answer, but I don't think I'm the right person to answer this large question. It's very important. It's happened to a lot of intergovernmental conference discussion too. I think China established a model to do restoration physically in a very effective way. And from China's experience, as far as from the information we can see in China, we can physically see the changes of ecosystems. They made significant contributions to the current environmental crisis. But how it is how generalized it could be applied to other places. At the very beginning, I showed a framework of different stages. Ecological restoration is never an ecological thing. It involves human, involves money. So it's kind of complex social problem. How good ecological restoration could be implemented, on the one hand, from my research perspective, rely on the local community. But on the other hand, maybe more practical perspective, rely on the economic conditions, how much money you can put into a project. And time period also important. If you can restore a system in 10 years, compare with you have to restore the system in 100 years, the effectiveness and consequence will be totally different. People are changing, so society are changing too. So I think it's a very interesting topic that probably could lead to a even broader discussion among all countries' peers and scientists. But thank you for the question. I think that's the best I could answer from my limited experiences.
Thank you. Some people also asked about the disponibility of your research papers, and we sent a website where you can find Professor Dou's papers, where they are available for us. And I think that's it. I think that's it. I think that concludes it. The attendance link was sent also for the chat, so you can complete it. And just a quick reminder that we still have more lectures scheduled for tonight and tomorrow morning. And so check those out. And thank you so much, Professor, for your time,
thank you all for
your presence.
Perfect arrangements. And thanks for the audience. Also, I can't see you because of the different platforms, but you have my contact information. And if you need any further information, feel free to contact me. I'm really happy and excited to have more opinions from other countries, especially Brazil, amazing country. I would love to visit always. Haven't got a chance yet, but I will.
You'll be very welcome.
Thank you very much. Have a good day for you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.